Sarah had always been the strong one, so when her husband Mark suffered a mental breakdown, she didn't hesitate to become his pillar. She juggled therapy appointments with managing their two young children and the household. Work became her refuge, a place to catch her breath and feel competent. Through it all, Sarah held on to the belief that they would weather this storm together, their love the anchor in the chaos.
Mark's recovery was slow, marked by setbacks and triumphs. I celebrated each milestone, each step towards his old self. Yet a subtle shift occurred in our dynamic.
Mark, once loving and appreciative, grew increasingly critical. He seemed to resent her strength, her ability to cope while he felt broken. The very qualities that had drawn him to her now fueled his frustration.
I initially dismissed his harsh words as a side effect of his condition. I told myself it was the depression talking, not the man I loved. But as weeks turned into months, his criticism chipped away at my self-worth. I felt unseen, unappreciated, my own needs buried under the weight of his expectations.
Mark's recovery brought its own set of challenges. While he regained his footing in the outside world, their intimate life remained fractured. He was distant, emotionally unavailable. He craved her support but recoiled from her touch.
I felt like a caretaker, tending to his wounds while my own festered beneath the surface. Resentment, a bitter seed, began to sprout in my heart. I yearned for the man who had once cherished me, who saw me as a partner, a lover. Instead, I felt like a prop in his narrative of recovery, my own struggles relegated to the shadows.
The weight of his expectations, the constant scrutiny of her every move became suffocating. The laughter they once shared became a distant memory, replaced by tense silences and barbed words.
I found myself walking on eggshells, afraid to upset the fragile equilibrium we had established. I became adept at anticipating his needs, suppressing my own to avoid conflict. But in the process, I lost sight of who I was outside the role of the dutiful wife.
The flirtation started innocently enough, a shared joke, a lingering glance with a younger colleague at work. It was harmless, a brief respite from the heaviness she carried at home. But it awakened something in Sarah, a dormant part of herself that craved attention, validation.
Sarah, you have such a sharp mind and a great sense of humor. I really enjoy our conversations.
His name was David, and he saw her, truly saw her in a way Mark hadn't in years. He complimented her intelligence, her humor, the very qualities that Mark seemed to resent. For a stolen hour each day, Sarah felt alive, desirable.
The guilt gnawed at me, but it was a small price to pay for the fleeting feeling of being seen.
The affair, when it happened, was brief and passionate. It wasn't about love, not really. It was a desperate attempt to reclaim a part of herself that had been buried under the weight of responsibility and neglect. It was a rebellion against the confines of her marriage, a cry for help that went unanswered in the silent walls of her own home. The guilt and shame were immediate.
I ended the affair as abruptly as it began. The fleeting pleasure wasn't worth the corrosive effect it had on my already fragile self-esteem.
She confessed to Mark, hoping that her honesty might be a catalyst for them to finally confront the chasm that had grown between them. But her confession, instead of sparking a dialogue, pushed them further apart.
I was consumed by my own hurt and betrayal, unable to see her pain, her own unmet needs that had led her astray.
He retreated further into himself, the walls around his heart growing higher, more impenetrable. In the aftermath of her confession, Sarah realized the devastating truth. Their marriage had become a transactional exchange, devoid of genuine intimacy and connection.
I had become a caretaker, my own needs sacrificed at the altar of his recovery. The guilt and shame I carried were a heavy burden, but they also fueled a growing sense of clarity.
The decision to file for divorce a year after her transgression was not made lightly. It was a culmination of years of quiet desperation, of feeling invisible and unvalued.
It was a recognition that my own well-being, my own happiness, mattered. I knew the road ahead would be arduous, filled with its own set of challenges. But there was a newfound sense of purpose in my step, a lightness that came from finally choosing myself.
She was done apologizing for her needs, for yearning for a love that honored all of her, flaws and all. The divorce, though painful, was a catalyst for growth.
I sought therapy, not to fix myself, but to understand the complex web of emotions that had led me to this point. I reconnected with old friends, rediscovered passions that had been pushed aside. I learned to forgive myself, to see my affair not as a moral failing, but as a symptom of a deeper wound in my marriage.
Years later, Sarah is thriving. She is a present and loving mother to her children, navigating the complexities of co-parenting with Mark with grace and compassion. She has built a successful career, her confidence radiating from within.
The woman who once walked on eggshells now walks with her head held high, my heart open to the possibility of love, a love that nourishes and celebrates all that I am.
Her journey, though born out of pain and betrayal, has ultimately been one of self-discovery and empowerment. She has emerged from the ashes of her marriage, stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before.